Paige Gordon is a live experience advocate, author, and speaker whose work explores the intersection of mental health, human behavior, and personal transformation. After struggling with bulimia for more than 22 years, she has become a leading advocate for eating disorder research and patient centered healthcare, serving on the board of directors of the National Eating Disorders Association, otherwise known as NEDA. She is the author of the forthcoming memoir, Searching for Full, which chronicles her journey from shame and self blame to healing, self discovery, and purpose. Disclaimer: any of the guidance offered by the podcast host, myself, or the podcast guests is our own guidance. We are not liable for any of the actions the podcast listener decides to do. Welcome to the show today, Paige. Glad to have you on.
Oh, Johnny, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for that intro. That was great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, Paige, I want to kind of like start off with I think your message is going to impact a lot of people today in different ways. I know, I don't think. But I'd love to hear a little bit about that moment of transition when I just mentioned at the end, you were in this
Mhm.
place of feeling a lot of shame and self-blame. And I think a lot of the listeners today can relate to that in different ways, different aspects in life. And I've certainly been there in my life to then actually, wow, this self-discovery, this transformation and purpose. I'd love to hear a little bit about that moment, that transition that started happening.
Yes. So thank you for asking that question. It's a little bit unusual because I think sometimes when people have these transformations, they say, "Oh, I just learned to love myself more," or I got rid of the negative self-talk and I did affirmations and I did. That's not exactly what happened to me, Johnny. What happened is I medicated myself and I started taking a medication, and for the first time in my life, my brain went quiet. And it was the first time that I had a comparison point to what was happening before versus after. And I was like, wow, wait a minute. If this is what a quiet brain feels like, and this is how normal people are walking around, what in the world was going on in my brain before that? And that opened up a lot of curiosity for me that replaced negative talk and criticism and doubt, because I started seeing my illness through the lens of biology. And I gave myself a lot more compassion for myself because I was like, oh, I was trying to fight an illness through which I thought for years I had a discipline problem, and that if I just tried harder, that I could do better. And I kept falling on my face. I mean, everyone around me too, just try harder, more willpower. And I just kept failing. And it was really taking a medication that re-regulated something that was so dysregulated in my brain, that gave me space to think differently. So it was biology first for me, and that curiosity aspect that replaced the judgment. Because I was like, oh, okay, I was fighting myself. I didn't have a character flaw. It was something going on in my brain, for whatever reason, which we could get into. But that was the first step, really.
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
yeah. I think I love this because I know the podcast is called like the self-esteem and confidence mindset, and we hear the term mindset, and it's like often in the personal growth space. I certainly heard is like you got to have the right attitude and all
Mhm.
this, but yeah, in my view as well, just from experience and like eating the right, even just like eating the right stuff or kind of
Mhm.
not going heavy on like my party days in my 20s and drinking a load
Mhm.
of alcohol and those kind of things, like not having the right chemistry for me. I know it's different, but like I've experienced that stuff's only limited when the chemistry is not there. So it sounds like it is a wow, a big discovery for you on the chemistry in your brain.
Changed my whole life. Not only am I living a bonus life now that I never thought was possible for myself, But because of that curiosity, I started engaging with the scientific community and researchers in the eating disorder space, which is how I ended up being on the board of NEDA. Because I was like, wow, like we need to figure this out. I think we might actually just not, I think we might have an incomplete picture on some of these illnesses. And
Mm,
so when people are labeled treatment resistant, which I hate that word, it's not it's not really the patient's fault. It's that we don't really understand what's going on under the hood, and we don't
mm,
have enough tools in the toolbox yet, you know. And particularly for eating disorders, are the most underfunded of all mental health out there. I mean, in the United States, like schizophrenia, for example, gets like 5 or 6 times more investment than eating disorders. It's like pennies. The consequence of that is that we're about 20 or 30 years behind in understanding the disease, and that impacts, people in treatment and that sort of thing.
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
With the scientific like approach and understanding that,
Hmm.
sometimes, especially in the world I feel where there's like so much like information and
Mm,
how did you like start to sort of uncover some things because there's probably a lot of information and yeah.
right. And so that's a great question. When I started taking medication, and I use an out-of-the-box treatment, it's not approved for eating disorders. 4 years ago when I started taking it, I was like, this is so profound that this is helping me. I need to talk to researchers about it. So I just started, I went on PubMed and I started trying to find scouring papers. That's just sort of how my brain works. And so I was like kind of going to the source. And then I found one paper and I reached out to that author. And then I actually just started playing this game of like academic roulette where I like literally was scouring like academic institutions for their eating disorder treatment facilities and like guessing what the lead lab person's email address was and just like sending him out in like very unhinged ways, being like, you need to take a scan of my brain. I took this medication and it basically cured me. Like, we're missing something. And it's a numbers game. I had someone in my 20s, a guy, tell me that dating was the same thing. You just keep asking girls out until one says yes. That's kind of how it was with me reaching out to researchers, you know. But it just took one to write me back, and it turned out one of the ones that wrote me back was a pretty famous one. And then it just sort of snowballed because once he was listening to me, then suddenly everyone else decided that I was worth listening to, which is his own interesting experience, being a lived experience person in that research world and kind of how they view our perspectives. But that's how I started doing it, and just having discernment. Because even, you're right, even in the community, eating disorder community, and it could be any community, there's still a lot of uncertainty and debate, which is a little unsettling because you're like, well, wait a minute, like you guys can't even figure it out. So why should I be listening to you? You guys are arguing all the time about what's what. So like, who am I supposed to listen to? But yeah, it's not easy. But for me, I would just go to the way my brain works to answer your question is I just go to the source and I read the papers myself. I've gotten memberships to Nature and JAMA and all that sort of stuff because I have trust issues, Johnny. I don't want someone else interpreting it for me. I want to read it myself. And even then, I've learned that papers can be biased. So
No, I've
yeah.
got you. I'll go into the source of it. I love it. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and you used to have like a lot of it sounded like I mentioned you had a journey from like shame and
Right.
self-blame. Like what
Mhm.
kind of helped you shift some of that? Because I know a lot of people struggle with those.
Right. It wasn't. So for example, when I took something and my behavior stopped, the binging and purging, that was just the first step of healing, right?
Mm,
Because the behavior stopped, I had enough courage to be open about my lived experience because I felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel and that I had confidence to start sharing my story. And it was through being honest about my lived experience and saying, hey, I've struggled with an eating disorder for 22 years. I was lying to everyone about it. I was in the shame cycle. No one knew I was sick. I was a high performer. I was like held it in this little box, right? And realizing that the ceiling didn't fall and that people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you told me. We love you. Like we kind of wondered what was going on with you. This makes so much more sense. And that process of being open and honest and discovering that like the world didn't fall apart was almost just as healing as the behavior stopping for me. It was kind of a two-part process. And that's not for everybody. It's not an easy thing to share lived experience, especially when you have a stigmatized disease. I'm very vocal on social media, and you should see some of the comments that I get from people in mental health. It's just like, are you having a bad day? Like, what's going on? But I do think that for me, it was really helpful to let that go because I can't change it, right? Like, I
Mm,
have a mental health issue. I have a mental health disease. And denying that and being ashamed about it doesn't help anything. It just makes me feel worse about myself. I hated myself for most of my life. I thought that the best thing that I could do would be to sequester myself from as many people as possible to try to not do damage because I felt that I had an incurable disease because I had tried everything and failed. And that certainly, if loved ones knew that I was sick, they were going to, of course, try to help me. And I was kind of going to pull them under the undertow, so to speak. I was going to make them drown with me. And so, the most loving thing that I thought I could do for the world is to isolate myself from everybody else to protect everyone. And that's how I lived my life. And that's so sad.
mm,
Um, and it factored into my love relationships. I would choose people that I thought were damaged in their own way so that I wouldn't ruin them and all sorts of stuff. And so my whole life has changed since now I understand my disease through biology and I'm more curious about it. I'm like, okay, this isn't a character flaw. I'm not a bad person. For whatever reason, some stuff got wired a little bit funny in my brain. I found something that helps me. Like, I don't need to be ashamed of that, and I can own it.
mm. So like that honesty piece, like and putting it out there, even if it wasn't to the world at first, kind of really help you just being like sort of like open and not hiding yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Mm,
Because I felt I was a liar. I was hiding. It wasn't just about my eating disorder, but I had this inherent feeling, which is sort of a catch-22. I would love to know what you think about it. But like when you go to therapy, you're going to therapy because you feel like something is off. But just like the process of doing that kind of validates your feeling of feeling inadequate, right? Because you're like, okay, I need to get something fixed. So it was almost like the process of like, oh, I need to get better. It was like, well, yeah, there's something wrong with me. This makes me feel terrible because I need help. People kept telling me, professionals that I would see, you need help, you need help. I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm broken. I'm like, not good. I'm not good. I'm not good. I'm not good. And that's what I heard, which is, I don't know how to overcome that actually, except just the way that I did it is have curiosity and understanding that it's not a character flaw.
mm, got you. Yeah, no, it's interesting what you say about even going to like therapy or asking for support, like kind of maybe validated that,
Hmm.
or kind of said to you somehow that like, oh, maybe there is something wrong, like character wise. Um,
Right.
mm,
I remember the first time it was suggested that I take medication. One of the there's two approved medications for eating disorders. There's one for bulimia nervosa, it's Prozac, and then one called Vyvanse, which is for binge eating disorder. We have nothing for anorexia. And Prozac works okay, it doesn't work. It's not a miracle, but it helps some people. Didn't help me. And I remember the first time when it was suggested that I take it, I wasn't depressed. Depression was never my problem. But the doctor, I can very clearly recall her telling me that in her experience, if I didn't take this medication, I would fail. And what I heard her say when she told me that was that, okay, there is something so fundamentally broken inside me that I need to be medicated. I need to be made something other than what I am in order for other people to tolerate me, in order for me to like fit into society, for me to be enough for people. I need to be medicated. That's what I heard. It was difficult for me to absorb at the time. Unfortunately, the medication didn't help me at all.
mm,
It just, for me, taking that medication. I mean, you could have had a nuclear bomb go out in front of my house and it'd be like, okay, well, I guess we should go pack my bags now. This is probably so I was lovely to be around. I was very level and like didn't react to anybody about anything because I was so medicated, but it didn't help my eating disorder at all. So
No, got you,
yeah,
got you. With sort of like eating disorders and sort of people you've known and the work you're doing on the board, which is incredible work. Is it always a chemistry a chemistry thing that's going on, or can it be from a psychological thing that kind of triggers it? I'm just curious.
that's such a good question. So it's not always one thing
Mm,
ever. And that's one of the things that makes eating disorders so complicated. They're really heterogeneous in nature, meaning that you can have two people with the exact same diagnosis and they can be stemming from completely different root causes. Not only within the same diagnosis, but certainly the difference between what I had, which is binge eating disorder, and then bulimia is worlds different than someone that has like your typical anorexia. Like I had more in common with my dog than I did with someone with anorexia, two different diseases. But what people like to say now is it really is a combination. There's a strong evidence that points that there is genetic components to these that make people vulnerable. And then there's the environment and then social. But it's worth knowing that, like, for example, anorexia, that's been around since a long time before social media, for example.
mm,
So it really, anorexia particularly, there's strong evidence to it being a biological, based in genetics type of disorder.
mm,
Yeah. But, I don't know if you've ever heard anyone else say this, but geneticists always like to say that genes load the gun and then environment pulls the trigger.
mm.
And
I've not
so
heard that. No, I've
oh,
not heard
okay.
that
I
before.
mean, I think it's great. So for example, I've learned through my research that I have a rare variant on one of my GLP genes, that is associated with binge eating disorder. Now, does that mean that I think that everyone that has this gene variant has binge eating disorder? No, I grew up in an environment when I was a child that had trauma and neglect. I grew up in a foster care situation, so that factored into it for sure. So perhaps I had this vulnerability, and then the environment pulled that trigger. And then I grew up in Southern California, where in the 90s, where the thinness culture was just like coming at you. It was like a perfect storm situation. And then
Mm,
boom, I had myself an eating disorder. So it really is a multi-factor, which is one of the things that makes them so complicated.
mm. So yeah, and we talk about this a lot on the podcast, but it's always just there's no one size fits all approach to anything,
That's
and
right.
it's great to have credible guests sharing their story like yourself, great inspiration, kind of coming on
Right.
here and saying what's worked for them. But I've never tried to come from a place where it's like, okay, this is the right sequence and the right order to solve
Right. I'm
this.
just
Or
one data point, and there's lots of different lived experiences. I'm just literally one. You can't make any conclusions with one data point on anything, right?
no,
But my whole thing is I'm really trying to push more research,
mm,
to try to figure this out because unfortunately, with eating disorders, we haven't improved outcomes in 20 or 30 years. And the outcomes are really dismal. 70% of people with bulimia nervosa return to behaviors after treatment, and 55% of people with binge eating do. And we have really effective treatments for anorexia at all. And
wow,
part of the reason is to what you just said is that we've been treating to the averages and not really understanding these subpopulations and these precision
mm,
medicine things because we haven't had the investment to really understand them. And so that's why we are where we are. Because I suspect what we have is a bunch of different disease states that are actually presenting as one thing, but are really quite different from one another.
mm. No, and like you said, the research. Well, you said about the research is tiny, or the amount that's been invested into the research and the work around it is tiny compared to something like schizophrenia, for
Hmm.
example. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, And
Yeah, Harvard came out with a study on this a couple of years ago. This is before the NIH imploded, so I like to use this as an example because, like, now no one's getting funded. But even before that, I think it was something like schizophrenia gets, I'm ballparking, but it was around $80 per person affected, and eating disorders is 79 cents per
oh
person
wow.
affected, even though there's a lot more people that have eating disorders than schizophrenia. And before the opioid crisis, eating disorders was the number one killer for mental health, anorexia. Well, now we're number two because unfortunately the opioid crisis, but it's an emergency. I think it's underfunded because people think it's a woman's disease, unfortunately. That's all I can figure. I don't have another way to explain it.
Mm.
Yeah, but it's
And
dismal.
wow, tiny. 79 cents of, that's, yeah, that is tiny. Like, it's not even eight, just under 80 to 1 compared to, something like
Yeah.
schizophrenia, like you said there.
And it's almost just as bad in the UK too. So I'm on the board for NIDA. The sister organization there is called BEAT, and they put out literature about that too, that it's just super, super underfunded. Hmm.
Mm. And do you think it's underfunded because it's just, you mentioned it being just the like women's thing, or do you think there are other reasons as well?
So I think there's multiple reasons. The number one probably is because it's historically been seen as a female disease. It's really, they're really misunderstood. I don't think people really understand that they are based in biology and they think it's a vanity thing or a choice or just a cute little thing that you do to try to control your weight when you overeat a little bit or something like that. And that's not really true. Additionally, pharma has pretty much abandoned us as a group. Pharma doesn't really like to invest in mental health, period. If you look at the drugs that we have for most mental health, they're repurposed drugs, meaning they came out for one indication and then people started realizing it was helping with something else and then they repurposed it. Very rarely do we have a drug that comes out for mental health that's just for mental health. The reason being is that we're a difficult group to study. There's you never know what we're going to do. And unfortunately, if someone ends up committing suicide in one of these trials, then suddenly you have to put that label on the entire class of medication.
Mm,
And that, it's a business decision at the end of the day. Even though a lot of people have eating disorders, I think it's still understood that or thought of that it's a relatively small group. And so you add that into the mix, it's a financial decision. Um, I think to move the needle, we're going to need to do what people have done in the rare disease space, which is it's going to take people with lived experience to come up to the table and get together and group and crowdfund to fund some of these smaller pharma companies to come up with new interventions. Because I would be surprised if it's going to be coming from the big players.
mm. No, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You you've got your memoir is coming out. I
Hmm.
think it's next year, early next year, Searching for
Hmm.
Full as well.
Yeah.
Love to hear a little bit how you came up with the title for that and what it's about.
Yes. So, thank you. Searching for Full is a nod to the fact that I was a binge eater, and so I was quite literally feeling hungry almost all
Mm,
the time. But it also nods to what I was saying before, which is that I just didn't ever feel like I was enough. I felt like I had to lie to be enough. I had to be a different person to be enough. That I sought validation through other people or through my job, like it coming towards me instead of like me filling my own cup. So it's a nod to that too. Um, and when I stopped having my eating disorder behaviors, I had so much time on my hands. It was unbelievable. I was like, oh man, if I hadn't have had my eating disorder, I could have been president of the United States. Like, this is amazing how much time. Does everyone have this much time all the time? Because it just took up every free waking hour of my day. And so I sat down and I started writing. And at first I was just journaling because it was the first time that I was able to sit down and actually reflect and think and take inventory of my life. And when I started getting more involved in the eating disorder space, is when I first realized how underfunded the space was, how I first realized that pharma had pretty much abandoned us. And I was like, wow, I don't think most people know this. This is unacceptable. I should tell my story because maybe people will care and do something about it. And so I decided to put it all out there. I had a hard conversation with my spouse, and I'm like, this is such a good idea for the kids, like, having me labeled. And he was so supportive of me, and I decided to do it. It was a heavy lift. I had to hire a developmental editor, to be honest with you, because I quickly learned, Johnny, that a bunch of journal entries is not a manuscript. You need like a beginning, middle, and end. But we got it there. And 100% of my royalties are being donated to research,
Oh,
specifically to
amazing.
try to figure out emerging treatments who they may help versus harm. I'm really committed to trying to bring awareness to this topic and see what I can do to try to move the needle. I'm personally funding research at Empirical College London right now. Um, I wish I had the money to run a whole randomized control trial. I don't,
Mm,
but I can do little things here and there, and this is my way.
I love that. Searching for Full coming out next
Mm.
year. Yeah, the journal entry. I like. It's funny what you said about journal entries and having to get that edited into a book. But
Yeah, it was my editor, man, she brought me to my knees like on a daily basis. It was so gnarly because you're just like pouring your heart out, and she's like, "Okay, we're cutting that chapter," you know. I'm like, okay, yeah,
I got it. No, no, that's going to be a powerful book for many. I'm sure for the individual who just kind of right now might be just feeling a little bit alone in that sort of like dark place of like maybe it's bulimia, maybe it's anorexia, or kind of in terms of eating disorder. What guidance
hmm.
would you give them?
Well, first, I would say go to the NIDA website. We have a wonderful survey that you can fill out, that kind of a tracker to see, if you're maybe need some more support. And then we list out some resources for you of people to call to actually get an assessment. So that would be my first thing.
Mm,
But for those people that feel like that they've been doing all that and nothing's working, I guess what I would say is that there is hope to be had, and that maybe you're not broken. It's that we really just don't have a full picture of the disease. And I feel like the solution is with lived experience voices. Um, with the community of mental health professionals really listening and trying to figure out what we've been missing, and just to keep telling your truth and trying to explain to people how you feel so we can figure this out together.
I love that. Yeah, sharing with like similar people.
Hmm.
Do you feel, that's maybe a controversial question to some, but do you feel like it can be more harm than good speaking to the wrong people sometimes?
Yeah.
Mm,
Here's the tricky part about lived experience in the eating disorder space that I found, just being in it in the past year, is
mm,
that they're so different, right? The symptoms from someone with binge eating disorder is quite different than someone with anorexia. So if you get two of those people sometimes in the same room talking about lived experience, they can kind of really trigger each
mm,
other. Even though I'm really clear to say that like my lived experience is just mine, but oftentimes you'll get somebody be like, well, I don't resonate with that. That's not true. That's not what happened to me. And I'm like, okay, great. Like I'm not like my story isn't negating yours, but that can happen a lot. But then also just generally, I think maybe what you're nodding to is that eating disorders can be kind of what's the word? Contagious. So there's a study that came out that if you just have one person in your class that has an eating disorder, the chances of someone else having it go up a lot. And if two people in the classroom have an eating disorder, the chances like kind of explode with how many people get the eating disorder. So just talking about it can sometimes be triggering and risky. Yeah.
oh, okay. No, I've got you. Makes sense. Yeah, I just wondered from, I don't know, sometimes like sharing with someone who we're just trying to like give advice and they've not got the experience, if that can kind of be harmful sometimes, I guess.
Oh my goodness, yes. I was just at a dinner last night with some girlfriends talking about sort of how many people are reaching out to me lately that resonate with something that they've heard me say, and they're like me too. And I'm getting a little overwhelmed with like people wanting to reach out to me, and I'm like, I'm trying to be appropriate because I am not a doctor. I cannot give medical advice, you know.
Mm,
And so my friends were like, "Oh, you should just do it. Be a coach." And I'm like, "Oh." I'm sorry for your listeners, but I'm like so anti-coach. I'm like, you're not a professional. I feel like could be doing harm. Like I'm not about to do that at all. And I'm very clear that I'm not giving anyone advice about
Mm,
treatment, except to say go talk to a professional and share the emerging literature with them if you read it. That's what I found. They're open to listening it. Doctors are so busy, they can't keep up with everything.
mm,
They get 5 minutes to see a patient. It's not like they can go home every day and like scour the journals and keep up with it all. So you'd be surprised that you could probably bring something new to them that they hadn't heard before. I found that.
mm. Interesting. Yeah, I found like not eating disorder related, but like something, I've gone through in health. When I went to a doctor on that, as opposed that was the mistake, as opposed to going to the specialist about that was
Right.
when I started getting real result, or kind of
Right.
more progress on the matter. Definitely.
Yeah. The generalist is just sort of like the first line filter, and then you got to go to the specialist. But honestly, even with the specialist, sometimes they're so busy now,
Mm,
you can't keep up with it. Researchers too. I mean, one of the most surprising things I found when I walked into the space is like how fragmented it was, because I found myself being the one that was like, "Well, wait, have you read what this person's doing? Have you read what this person's doing?" And most of the time they said no, because they have their nose down doing their own research. They don't look up to like read the room. It was really shocking. And I was the one that was like kind of connecting all these different fields and
mm,
specialties that were looking at the same problem through a different window. And I'm like, wow, this is wild. So,
crazy. There's so much.
yeah.
How much? Yeah, so much going on.
Yeah.
Paige, I know you've got so much value to add, and you've given, so many golden nuggets and so much honesty and opened your story today, and definitely helping a lot of people in the world. I'd love to know, as we kind of wrap up today, where is the best place for the listener to find you, to find out more about your story, obviously the work you're doing with Nida as well, and is there maybe a final point you want to leave us with today?
So the best place to reach me is my website, so paigegordonauthor.com, and I'm really active on Instagram, and I'd love it if your listeners would follow me at Paige Gordon Author. And then I'm also on LinkedIn at Paige Gordon. And the last thing I want to leave your listeners with is that if you haven't found something that's worked for you yet, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something out there. It might just mean that we need more pages to the playbook,
Mm,
more tools in the toolbox, because science is always evolving. And that's probably more what it is. It's not a you problem, it's that we don't really understand the problem.
I love that. No, so yeah, it's not a you problem. There's a lot out there, and it's just we're always evolving. Whether
Mhm.
maybe it's an eating disorder, whether it's something else you're having shame with as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. It's beautiful last words. And for Paige's website, for our social media, for all of those, you can find that in the show notes below this episode as well. So a massive thank you, Paige, for coming on today.
Thank you. So fun.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. So that concludes today's episode. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.